It's Friday night. I'm Mike Leonard. Welcome to Friday Night Photoshop. Tonight will be an introduction to layers. I think layers is perhaps one of the more liberating things that you'll ever learn in Photoshop because there's so much you can do with it. Like this screen that you're looking at. This is made up of multiple layers, text layers, graphics layers, lots of things go into this particular page. So to begin, I like to talk about this ham sandwich. And some of you have seen this before. It's funny, this never gets old. It's but I think it's very effective. So first of all, what are layers in Photoshop? Well, we need to be able to see them for me to really be able to describe it. So I'm going to come up here to Window and then down here to Layers. Now there's a shortcut for this. It's Function 7. So if I hit F7, now we can see over here the Layers dialog box. And over here, we're looking at the product, if you will, of all these layers. Now, the way I like to think of this, think of this sandwich that you're seeing in this graphic. Think of this as being an aerial view. All right, you're looking down on this. If you were to make up a sandwich and put it on a plate and put it on a platter and all this, and if you were to hover over it with your camera and look straight down, that's what you would see. That's the aerial view of the sandwich. Now, if you were to come over and look at this from the edge, from the side, you would have layers, you'd have stacks, and that's what we're looking at over here. Now, of course, the very bottom layer is going to be the plate, right? Then on the plate, I've got a piece of bread, and then I put some ham on that bread. I put some tomatoes on the bread, on top of the ham. Then I put some cheese on, and then I put some mustard, and then finally the bread goes on the top. So this would be the cross section of this sandwich. Now, with layers, I'm able to turn on and off each layer using these little eyeballs. So if I shut this top one off, now we're not going to see the bread on the top, but we can see the mustard underneath. If I shut off the mustard, I put a lot of cheese on this, as you can see. Oh, some tomatoes. If this tutorial makes you hungry, I apologize. And then there's lots of ham that I put on this particular sandwich. And then there's, of course, the bread. The bread is on the plate, and the plate is on the tablecloth, right? So this is simply what layers are. Now, the nice thing about this is I can manipulate layers. If I wanted to have a plate of mustard, I could do that. You see, what I've done is I've just turned on the mustard layer and the plate layer. Now, I can make a real mess if I wanted and put the mustard on the table. But we're not going to do that. Maybe I'd like the mustard to be on the bread on the bottom instead of on the top. And I could do that. Now, here's one thing you need to know about layers. Layers are hierarchical, meaning whatever's on top is going to be on top in the graphics area. So in their aerial view, looking straight down, what I've got here is basically a mustard sandwich right now. Because if I take that top piece of bread away, see there's mustard on the bottom piece of bread, and so that's just basically a mustard sandwich, isn't it? So why I'm showing this is, what if I were to take and turn this on and take this mustard layer and put this up top above the bread layer? I can do that. All I have to do is just take and move it up. And now we're seeing the mustard on top of this bread. And when we look at this layers list over here, mustard is on the top and the bread is underneath. Now I can move any one of these layers. I could take the tomatoes and put them on top of the mustard if I wanted. I have to turn that on so we can see it. Now this would be a silly way to make a sandwich. Some might argue, well, it all goes in the same place, so what's the difference? But the point is, usually when we make a sandwich, there's a certain order in which it wants to go. So same thing with layers. If we're going to be putting together multiple images or graphics or text, there are places for that to be. And the one complaint that I get more often than not after doing a discussion about layers is somebody will say, but Mike, I can't see something. Maybe if I were to put up some ham here, and if I were to take the tomatoes and put them down here under the ham, are there tomatoes there? Well, yeah, there is, but this ham is hiding it. In fact, let me just shut this off and shut this off, and you'll notice that if I go with a slice of ham, you don't see the tomatoes, but the tomatoes are in fact there. If you take a sandwich and put a couple of slices of tomatoes and then take a piece of ham and put over it, does that mean the tomatoes are no longer there? No, they're there. They're just under the ham. Now, that's what we're talking about. Layers are hierarchical, so whatever's on top is going to trump whatever's underneath. It's that simple. These layers are highlighted just simply by clicking on them. You see how this is a lighter gray now? Now I'm working on this particular layer. If I click on the tomatoes, I'm pointing to that one. And these little eyeballs here simply turn on and off that layer to make it visible or not. I can just click on the top and just run my cursor all the way down and turn them all on. Just like I could click on the top one and just move my cursor all the way down to the bottom and shut them all off. So just some little shortcuts that might help you. But the most important thing is, even if you don't think something is there, bring out the layers and take a look and see what's underneath. It's very possible that you might have something on top hiding everything. Let's show some things that we can do with layers. So I'm going to open an image from Bridge, and here are some holiday lights. And every time you open an image, it's instantly a background. Now, the way I want you to think about a background is think of this as being your basement, your cellar. You can't go any lower. You can't go under the basement layer. Now, if you want to, you have to make this a layer that you can then move and edit. So the quickest way to make this a background to a layer that you can do more with is just double click on it and say OK. Now we have a layer 0. I could put a layer underneath this now if I were so inclined. And of course I can put them on top. Now I'll show you why that could be important to you. Let's take a background that I've created, and I'd like to put this picture on to this canvas. Here's how we can do that. I'm going to take this and simply drag this down so it's no longer docked up top there. And now I'm going to take this layer and drag it over here to this background. And now I'm just going to take this layer that I had and just get rid of it. I don't need this anymore. Obviously, this is really big. So what I need to do is to resize this. I'm just going to right click, say free transform. And if I use my mouse wheel to pull this out, I can make this small enough to fit into this space. There. So I'm just going to plant it there. Now, if we look at this, I have a layer that I can turn on and off. That is that image. And here's the background, which if I shut this off, by the way, whenever you see checkerboard, that means it's transparent. And it's so transparent that it's like a picture frame that doesn't even have glass. That's how transparent that is. So what I've just done is I've just taken this image and I've just put it onto this white background, and that's one layer on top of the other. That's pretty simple. What if I wanted to add a second image? Well, maybe what I'd like to do would be to take this, and I'll just free transform this, and I'm just going to make this small, and I'll just stick it up here in the corner like that. And now I'm going to go and look to open another image. And in this case, maybe I'll take this lighthouse. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to undock this just by pulling it down. That's all I have to do. And pull it down and get it out of the way. And then I'm going to take this image and throw it onto my canvas. I don't need that to be open anymore. And now I'm going to go right click, free transform, and I just need to resize this. Sometimes it helps if you're to resize things up front, but I'm going to do this just to show you what we're talking about. Now, you'll notice that this image, and if I use this little move tool, I can move this around freely, is over the other image. And why is that? It's because it's on top of the stack of layers. Remember, layers are hierarchical, so whatever's on top is what you're going to see on top over here. Now, if I wanted to have this picture of these lights to be on top of this one, all I have to do is take and click on that layer and simply move it up. And now look at that. Now if I move this around, it's on top of the other one. So that instantly proves the fact that whatever's on top is going to take precedence in the image over here. I'll put a third image up there. And this time I'm going to put something that's got maybe just a little more light to it. I'll put these boats up there. So I'm just going to double click to open the boats, and there they are. And I'm going to pull this down, get it out of the way, and just take this background and throw it over here and say, huh, now this is a good case in point. Are those Christmas lights still there? Yes, they are, because if I shut off this top layer, there they are. See, this is completely covering those. So what I need to do is to resize this one. So I'm just going to go and do a quick resize, free transform. And I think you're going to quickly get what I'm doing here. This is all going to make sense here. All right, so I'm just going to pull this back open, and maybe I'll stick this, maybe I'll place this up here in this corner. I don't like that, it's covering the lighthouse. But I will just leave it there. Now, this layer here is on top of this layer, which is on top of this layer. Can we see how that all works? So if I were to take this layer number 1 here and move that around, you're going to see that it's going to go behind one but over the other. And we know why that's happening. Again, it all has to do with the hierarchical order of layers. By using this move tool, if you're not sure what layer you're working on, if you just simply go and right click on it, it will tell you that this is layer number 1 and that this is on top of the background. If I go right click on this one, this is layer number 3 on top of the background, and then this one over here is layer 2 on top of the background. Now, if I come over here to layer 3 and choose that, I can move this down. And if I come over to this one, layer 1, and move that over here, now watch what happens when I right click on this one. Layer 3 is on top, followed by layer 1, followed by layer 2, followed by the background. So if you ever get lost about, gee, which layer is which here, and maybe these little icons are too small to look at, so here's a quick tip. All you need to do is just to right click. Like if I were to right click on this one, this is just layer 1 on the background. I right click here, that's layer 2. If I go to the edge of this, it's just layer 3 on the background. But if I go here in the middle, you see how I've got all these different layers? And this proves it over here too. Here's layer 3, 1, 2. Don't get too tripped up by these numbers because I can move these around, but the numbers stay with the layer. Here's one more thing I can do if I wanted to. So since this layer here is the holiday lights, the tree, I can click over here where it says layer 1. If I double click, and I can call this Ligated-Tree. I can name the layer. This one here is the boats. So if I double click on the name, BOATS, so this could help you to organize the layers. So now you are able to see not only the small thumbnail image here, but you can also see what you've named this. So this one we're naming boats, this one we're naming trees, this one over here is the lighthouse. So if I just double click on this, L-I-G-H-O-U-S-E, lighthouse. Now, this is obviously nothing that I would be too proud of wanting to show just because of the way that these are positioned. I'm going to save this, but I want to save this in a fashion that I can go and re-edit these. And the way I do that is by going over to File, Save As, and now I'm going to give this a title. I'm going to call this montage and montage sample. And then I just need to find a place to put this. And I think since I'm discussing layers, it would probably make the most sense to put it into layers. And I'm just going to call this one montage sample so I can find it a little quicker. There we go. Now, by saving it as a Photoshop file, a PSD file, and by saving it with layers turned on, I'm able to save this composition, and I can close out of this. And if I simply come back in and open that file again, here I come right back to where I last was, and I have the ability to edit these just like I did before. This is why it's important to save your composition in the layers so that you can go back and edit this. Now, this would not be the file that you'd want to send out to have printed because this is in layers. Instead, what you need to do if you're going to be sending this out to print is you go up to layer and you come down here and you say flatten the image. Now watch what happens to the layers when I do this. It's flattened like a pancake. It's just now background, and that's all it is. And if I want to go and move these around, I cannot do that anymore. I would have to go and reopen this, or I'd have to go and rebuild this whole graphic all over again. So this is why it's really important to only flatten at the very end so that you could then send this out and have it printed. Now you can do a Control Z so long as I don't close this, and now I'm back to having the editable canvas. So I'm able to move things around again, resize things, whatever I might need to do. So we do have the ability to change the opacity of layers, and we do that right up here under opacity. Now, by the way, you notice how my cursor goes from the arrow to the hand with the arrows on either side? That's called a scrubby. And all I have to do is left click and hold and simply move my mouse left and right on my mouse pad to fill in that value. It's 100% now. I could use this little pull down and use this little slider if I wanted, but oftentimes when you do that, you're busy looking up here at the numbers and making sure that your mouse is where it wants to be. I prefer to take what I feel is the creative approach, and that's simply hover my mouse over the opacity where the scrubby appears. Now I look at the image and I just simply move this over to get this to the point where I want it to be. I could do that with any of these, except for the background, because the background is locked, remember? So far, I've shown you how to manipulate the layers. Let's talk about where it might be useful to combine layers, but to poke a hole through one so we can selectively see through it. I'm going to open two images in Adobe Bridge. However, I need to bring them in as layers. So how I'm going to do that is I've just made the selection. Now I'm going to go to Tools, go to Photoshop, and I'm going to say load these files into Photoshop layers. You see how we had to do that? We had to go to Tools, Photoshop, then load files into Photoshop layers. Here's one, and there's the other. So remember, you might ask, where'd the other image go? Well, it's because this one is completely blocking the one underneath. And if I shut off the eyeball, there's the other vehicle. I would like to make it so we can see both vehicles. The first thing I really need to do here is I could say, well, okay, we'll just take the opacity and move that down. Well, we got a couple of things going on here, not the least of which the camera moved, so I really need to align that, and I'll show you a quick way to do that. But secondly, I don't want ghost vehicles. You can see through both of them. So instead, I'm going to choose both layers just simply by clicking on the top one and shift clicking on the bottom one. Or you could do a control click. Now that I've got them both selected, I come over here to edit, and I'm going to choose this option that says auto align layers. And I'm just going to go ahead and do auto. And I'll say okay. So this has just put the two together and it's aligned them. And if I shut the eyeball off up top, you'll notice that that fence in the background doesn't move anymore. So I can turn this on and off. It's like a shot with a tripod. Now, I want to be able to see the other vehicle. By choosing just the top layer, once again, opacity is not going to be an aid here because I'm going to have these ghost vehicles. You see, if I go down to opacity of 0, we see the one on the bottom. If I go all the way up to 100%, we see the one on the top. So what I need to do is to come here and add a mask, a layer mask. Now, the best way to think about this is what the mask looks like. Not too exciting, just all white. So if I click on the image, I'm not on the mask. If I click on the mask, see the little white box around it? So I'm going to paint on this mask. And when I paint with black, I'm going to grab a brush and I'm using black. And I'll just use the cursor key to open this up a little. So if I come over here and paint on the mask, and I use a paintbrush, I'm going to paint with black. Look at what I can do. I can paint in what looks like I'm painting in the layer underneath. It kind of is. I'll give it the shadow. Now, if I go look at this layer mask, this is like if I were to take these two images and put one directly over the other. And if I had scissors and if I could cut a hole in the top one, you would see that I'm able to look through it. And if I shut off the bottom one, you'll notice what I've got there. Remember, anytime we see this transparency, that means that we're looking through it. And so I'm basically cutting the hole so we can see through it. And if I bring this up, that is the image underneath. This is a really nice way to be able to combine elements in an image. This would be a great way to add somebody to a group shot. This is also a great way to eliminate things. So let's say if we only wanted this vehicle here, but there was something happening over here. Well, the best way to think about this is white's going to conceal, black's going to reveal. So again, I'm on the mask, and if I go here and change this to black, I'm going to be painting this out. But isn't it odd that I got the shadow still there? Now, if I made a mistake, all I have to do is tap the X key, and that will exchange black for white. And now I can just come back in here and just freely paint this back in. And there we go. You can see what we're doing. And if I come over here and look at the mask again, hit the Alt key and this mask, you can see I was a little sloppy here. So maybe I'll just go in here and touch this up. You can paint right on the mask. Not a problem. In fact, I'll just kind of clean this all up just like that. And now I'll come back and we'll click underneath. And that's showing me the fact that I've got those two put together with a hole cut into the top one so I can see what's underneath. So far, what I've done is to show you how to cut out a hole. And that's completely a cut right out and you're seeing right through. But did you know that we can actually change the opacity by doing this with a different shade of gray? So let's see how that would work. There is the mask that I've got. And I'm just going to come down here to click out of that. Now, if I come over here and for the color picker, I'm going to grab this shade of gray. And I'll say, okay, watch what happens when I paint with this particular shade of gray. That vehicle is becoming transparent. Let's go grab a different shade of gray, maybe a little bit lighter, and let's see what happens here. I can see through more of that vehicle, can I? It's becoming a ghost. So I can vary the opacity of this cutout just by changing the shade. Now, let's just go back to black. And I'm just going to put a little black dot here and a little black dot there. If you look at this, You see what's happening? This is 100% cut through. This is some percentage. And of course, out here is going to be 0% because it's white. So this could be really useful anytime we want to mask something and have a certain opacity. Maybe we'd like to change the brightness of something, or maybe we'd like to call attention to something. That's where we might make everything dark, but we just highlight one thing in the image. I've done that with a group shot of a running race one time where I darkened everybody except for this one child that was in the race just to make this one person stand out. So there's some fun things we can do with that. Let me show you another fun thing that we can do with that. Here's another use for masking. Let's say if I were to take this background, I do a Control J to make a copy of that layer. That's a quick way to duplicate layers, by the way, and they're exact copies. If I shut the eyeball off and then turn it on, there is no difference. Now what I'd like to do with this top layer is I'm just going to desaturate it. This is not the best way to desaturate to make black and white. We'll do a whole black and white night, but I just would like to show this to you quickly. Now I'm going to go and add a layer mask. And you see this white is concealing you from being able to see what's behind it. So I'm going to paint in black, and I'm going to paint right onto this mask. And I'll make my brush a little smaller and watch what happens. I can do selective color. And it's okay if I'm a little sloppy here. And we got one more. Yeah, I know there's more, but let's just do just these. Now, I was a little sloppy there, right? So if I just simply zoom in, and I'm going to hit the X key to exchange the black for white, and remember this I need to make white. So I'm going to make the brush a little smaller. Now there are better ways to do this that you can make a selection, but look at what I'm doing. I'm just going around here, just kind of cleaning up where I went overboard just a little bit. But you get the idea. So you see, you can come in and you see I went too far again, so I just hit the X key, and then I just fill in. So I keep my finger on the X key when I do this, so I can be either excluding this or including this. That's not too bad up on the top. Now this is from a JPEG, so this is going to be a little bit sloppy, as you would expect. If I'd source from a raw file, this would be a lot nicer. Okay, but I think you see where I'm going with this. Now again, I'm just doing this very quickly, but you could see that you could do selective color. And this is what we started with. And what we're ending with is this, where I've basically cut these out. This is I made this black and white. And then I'm cutting holes in this, and I'm putting this in behind it. And it's okay that this is the background. It doesn't have to go anywhere. So there's kind of a fun way to do selective color. So here's an interesting way to do a vignette. If I just simply take this image of these lobster traps and do a quick Control J, all I've done is just to make a copy of this. Now if I come up here and take this rectangular marquee tool, what I can do is draw a box. And then if I hit delete, now what I've got is an image with a hole in it. If I come up here and change the blend mode to multiply, when you hit multiply, that's like taking two 35mm slides and holding one exactly over the other, and the two images have to be identical. Anything that's dark is going to go darker. Anything that's light won't go that dark. But anything that's black is going to go jet black. So look at what I've just done here. And if I turn this on and off, See, there's a real quick way to darken the edges. And oh, and if you'd like to control that, change the opacity. See, we can move this back and forth. So there's a way to do some edge darkening using layers. Now I want to show you another way to do this. So let's go to another image, and we're going to find yet a different way to darken the background. Now, for this, I am going to need to duplicate this layer again. So the quick way to do this, Control J, think of that as being like you're jumping. I can come up here and immediately go to multiply, and you can see what's happening. That's pretty dark. Now what I'd like to do is I'm going to make a mask, and I'm going to draw a box, and I'm going to make sure the feather is down to 0. And I want to maybe just spotlight this area of the image right there. If I were to fill this with black, I have certainly managed to darken all around the perimeter, and I've certainly got this light the way I like it, but I would kind of like this to be a little bit of a softer blend. And by the way, if I take the opacity, you see I can change that background. And you notice that that area that I've turned black is not making any difference because it's transparent. So what I can do is come over here, and if I look at this mask, I could come up here to filter and blur and choose Gaussian blur. And as we know now that different shades of gray will have a different effect on how that blends, right? So black is going to be a complete cutout, white's going to be a complete block. Well, somewhere in the middle here, it's going to be the opacity is going to be graduated. So I'll say okay to this, and look at what this has done. If I click on the bottom again, you see what I've just done is I've got this nice soft edge, and now I could take this top layer and bring the opacity back, and it's subtle, but you see I've got the lighthouse a little bit lighter than the rest of the image. Now I don't like how the sky looks right in this area here. So what I can do is I can come back over here and I can edit this mask. So if I were to paint with white, and then you see there's choosing white, that's good. So I'm going to swap that over, and I'm going to go grab a brush. And now I need to have a big brush, so I'm going to use the bracket keys, and I'm going to paint right on the layer here, and I'm just going to come in here and just say this part of the sky, I'd like that to be just a little more normal. Okay, now that doesn't look normal at all. And the reason for that is if I look at this, you'll see that whole area is just incredibly sharp. It's really hard. So if I just take and draw a little circle around this, and then go up to filter and say Gaussian blur, see what I've just done? I've softened that. Now if I apply that, and if we go look at this, I've just softened that a bit. And I could probably do a little more in here. But when we look at this, just kind of subliminally, your eye's going to the brightest part of the image, and so you're probably looking more at the lighthouse than the sun coming up over in the horizon. So we can train people's eyes to look at certain directions, and simply by doing some creative edge darkening and vignetting. So there are some cool things that we can do with layers. So I'm going to open this picture. This happens to be a raw file. So I'm happy with the way this looks, so I'm just going to go ahead and open this image. So now I'd like to demonstrate putting text over an image. So by using this type tool, I can go up here and you can look at all the different fonts. And again, if you're not seeing the fonts in the size that you'd like them to be, all you have to do is come up here to the type and say font preview size and choose huge. Now I'm just going to grab this one called Trajan Pro, and I'm not going to worry about the size. And I do want to have this centered, so I should be able to click here. This lorem ipsum comes up to show you a sample of what it's going to look like. And now I'm going to type Lupine, lupin. Now, I would like to have this a different size. So by wiping over this, this is where I can come up here and use scrubbies. You see how my cursor goes from the arrow to the T, over the T to those two little arrows? If I simply click and hold, watch what I can do. I can easily change the size of that font. Now, who knew that I would want to have that 212 points? If I just click a little above, I can place this right down here. And I can say OK to that. So now I've got the word lupin in there just the way I want it. And I might do some effects to maybe put a drop shadow on this. But you see how quickly we can go and take the type tool and put something in here. Maybe I'd like to put in some more type, and I can do that. You see I've got type here on a layer, and by the way, I can turn that on and off, right? And I can even blend that back just like I've done before. So if we wanted to make this look like a stain, boy, this would be a quick way to do a watermark, wouldn't it? I could have typed my name or my email address or maybe my website. Yeah, it's a quick way to do that, right? So I've got that all the way up to 100%. Now what I'm going to do is add one more layer. And what do I want to put in? Maybe the location. So I'm going to take this and move this up just a little bit. There we go. And I think I'd like to put Boothbay Harbor, Maine underneath. So I'm going to need to have a slightly smaller font. So when I click underneath, you see that's huge. So what I'm going to do is come up here and make this a little smaller. And now I'm going to type Boothbharbor, comma, Maine. And it would help if I knew how to type. There we go, Boothbay Harbor, Maine. I'm going to wipe over this. And once again, I'd like this to kind of match the same spacing as lupin. So I'm just going to pull this out to about there. And I'm going to move this over about there and say, all right. So now what I've done is I've got this large lupin, I've got smaller Boothbay Harbor, Maine, and there are the lupins, and that's the walk bridge in the background. So there's an instant postcard, right? If you wanted to take and print that. Now, here's the nice thing is, again, these are all layers, and I can turn these on and off, and I can go and re-edit these. But more importantly, I can go to File, and then do a Save As. And I'm in the images here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to title this Lupin Layers. And then I'm going to do sample, because this is a sample tonight. Again, I'm going to save it as layers. I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file. By the way, I could save it as a TIFF file. TIFF does support layers. JPEG does not. Most other formats will not support layers. I think the best one to use, though, is Photoshop because it's really efficient. And I'm just going to say save. Now, if I were to go away, shut off the computer, come back, turn it on, I could reopen this and maybe I misspelled something. I can very easily go in and edit whichever one of these layers I might need to edit to get that to be just right. Maybe I would like to change the color of one of these fonts. Maybe I'd like this to be a little more of a gray for whatever reason. Or I can make it red, which I don't think makes sense. But you can see I've got this flexibility, and it's all brought to you by layers. As I mentioned at the top, I think layers is one of the more liberating functions you could ever learn in Photoshop, next to cropping and resizing. Because from this, you can now create posters, you can create greeting cards, you can create postcards, you can create flyers. There's any number of things that you can do with layers. Before I wrap up tonight, I'd like to just show you a couple more things that we can do with these layers. So if I click on this one that says Lupin, and again, we know which layer that is. If we didn't know, if I come up here and choose this Move tool, and if I just come over one of these letters and right click, you'll see this says Lupin, and that's on top of the background. If I come over here and click on this H, this says Boothbay Harbor, Maine, background. If I click on this Boothbay Harbor, Maine, it's going to take me to that layer. So what if you had a whole bunch of words up here and there's one that you needed to get to and you're trying to figure out, okay, which one is it? All you need to do is come over to this, right click, and choose that one. So I've chosen Lupin, and what I would like to do next is come down here to FX, which is effects. And I think the first thing I'd like to choose would be drop shadow. And just by clicking on drop shadow, it's going to cover this up. I'm going to move this up here to get it out of the way. It immediately puts up this little drop shadow, and if we turn this on and off, you'll see what it's doing. It's putting that nice black border all around it. Now we've got some options here. Again, we can change the opacity of that black. We can change the distance of where that drop shadow is going to be, and the spread, and even the size. By the way, I can just come down here and click on this black drop shadow and move it anywhere I want.
Oh, wow.
So in this case, I don't think I want that distance to be that far away, and I'm going to bring the spread down, and maybe I'll just pull the size out just a little bit so it gives me a little bit of a stain, so white against the grayer background. That's going to just make it appeal, just to pop out just a little bit. And I'll say okay to that. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I could apply that same effects and drop shadow to the Boothbay Harbor, Maine? All I have to do is right click down into this area here and say copy the layer style, then go up to this layer, right click, and I have to go down here and look for paste layer style. And now I've just put that same drop shadow into that text layer down below. How do I know that this is centered? This is just one more thing I'm going to show you. If I were to go and select all three layers, you could click on the top one and shift click on the bottom, or just control click on all of these. Now, if I go up here to this Move tool, you'll see that we've got some transform tools up top here, one of which is called Align Horizontal Centers. And if I click on this, yep, it moved it over. It exactly centered this based upon the background. That's what it did. Because I had the background chosen, it's going to take these and align it to the background. So now I've got this finished piece, and if I just close layers by hitting F7, and I'm going to close that text box, and if I do a Control 0, that's going to bring that up full. And if I come out of the text and just hit the letter F and then the letter F again, there's the finished product. So there's a quick intro to layers, part 1, and there will be a part 2 coming up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.